They left him for dead in a valley that swallowed sound. No pulse on the tracker. No voice on the comms. The SEALs had already written the after-action report in their heads, but one person refused to believe it. A female sniper nobody asked, nobody trusted, nobody even noticed. While the team packed their grief into duffel bags, she stayed behind her scope, watching the darkness move in ways darkness shouldn't move. What she saw next would rewrite everything they thought they knew about survival, loyalty, and the kind of courage that doesn't wait for permission. If you want to see how far this story reaches, drop a comment with your city below. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about never leaving a soldier behind. The base smelled like diesel and defeat. Razor point forward. Operating base squatted in the Afghan highlands like a scar on the earth. PESCO barriers stacked in brutal geometry, guard towers watching nothing, floodlights carving the night into stark whites and deeper blacks. It wasn't much. Plywood, sandbags, a landing zone that doubled as a volleyball court when mortars weren't incoming. But tonight, it felt smaller than usual. Tighter, like the walls were closing in. The Chinook's rotors were still fading into distant thunder when the first operator hit the ground. His boots struck the hard pan with a hollow thud. No spring in the step, no relief in the posture. Just weight. He moved like a man carrying more than gear. Behind him, the rest of Alpha Team filed out in silence. 12 men. 11 now. Their kit told the story before their faces did. Plate carriers scraped raw from diving into gravel. Sleeves stiff with dried blood. Some theirs, most not. Magazine pouches hung open and empty. One man's rifle stock was cracked straight through, held together with rigger's tape and spiked. Another limped on a leg that would need an X-ray and probably surgery. Dust caked everything. Not the fine kind that brushed off, the kind that mixed with sweat and fear and became part of you. They moved like ghosts through their own base. No one spoke above a murmur. A few nodded to the support crew waiting with water and medkits, but the nods were automatic. Muscle memory. The kind of politeness you perform when your brain is still 3 valleys away, replaying the moment everything went wrong. Captain Renner was the first to break formation. He stopped near a stack of ammo crates, pulled his helmet off, and just stood there, staring at nothing. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he refused to spit out. His hands, steady hands, hands that could field strip an M4 blindfolded, shook as he set the helmet down. "Anybody got comms with Overwatch?" someone asked. His voice cracked halfway through. "Negative." "TOC?" "They're dark, waiting on us." Renner's eyes closed, just for a second. When they opened again, they were harder, colder, the kind of cold that came from making a decision you'd hate yourself for. "All right," he said quietly. "Gear down. Medical checks. We debrief in 20. Cap, 20 minutes, Hayes." Hayes, a wiry kid from Georgia with a baby face that belonged in a high school yearbook, not a war zone, looked like he wanted to argue. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "We're just leaving him?" The silence that followed was the kind that had weight, physical, oppressive, the kind that pressed down on your chest and made it hard to breathe. Renner turned slowly. His face was unreadable, but his voice was made of gravel and broken glass. "He's gone, Hayes." "You don't know that. I know what I saw." Renner's voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper because of it. "I know what the tracker said. I know what the radio said. I know we stayed on station until we were taking fire from 3 sides, and the bird was going to get shot down if we didn't pull out." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Hayes could hear. "And I know that if we go back in there blind, we're not bringing anyone home. We're just adding to the body count." Hayes' throat worked. His eyes were wet, but he didn't blink, didn't look away. "He'd come for us," Hayes said. "I know." Renner's voice softened, just a fraction, just enough to let the pain through. "I know he would, but he's not here to give that order. I am, and I'm saying we're done." Hayes stood there for another 5 seconds, long enough that a couple of other operators glanced over, watching, waiting to see if this was going to become a problem. Then he turned on his heel and walked toward the barracks, hands balled into fists, shoulders rigid with the kind of anger that had nowhere to go. Renner watched him go. Then he looked down at his own hands, at the dried blood under his fingernails, at the tremor he couldn't quite control. Jesus, he whispered to no one. Well, 60 meters away, on the eastern perimeter berm, Mara Kincaid didn't move. She was kneeling behind a Barrett M107, the big .50 caliber rifle propped on a low sandbag rest, her eye pressed to the optic. From this angle, she had clean line of sight to the valley mouth, 8 clicks out, thermal overlay painting the landscape in shades of white and gray. Nothing moved, which was exactly the problem. Mara had been attached to Razor Point for 3 weeks now. Long-range overwatch, counter-sniper. The job no one wanted because it meant lying in the dirt for 16 hours straight, pissing into a bottle, watching the same empty ridgeline until your eye socket ached and your brain started inventing movement just to stay awake. She was good at it, better than good. But tonight she wasn't looking for enemy snipers. She was looking for ghosts. Still out there? The voice came from behind her, soft, cautious, like the speaker wasn't sure he was allowed to interrupt. Mara didn't turn. Yeah. Corporal Levin, radio operator, early 20s, perpetually sunburned, crouched down beside her, careful not to cross her sightline. He had a thermos of coffee in one hand and a look on his face like he was visiting someone in the hospital. They're saying he's KIA, Levin said quietly. Tracker went dark. No beacon, no comms. Cap's calling it. Mara adjusted the focus on her optic, a half-degree left. The valley yawned open in the display, all shadows and stone. Cap wasn't there when it happened, she said. Levin hesitated. You were? I had eyes on the whole approach, start to finish. And? She finally pulled back from the scope, blinking against the sudden darkness. Her face was unremarkable. Sharp cheekbones, sun-weathered skin, brown hair pulled back in a braid that hadn't been washed in a week. No makeup, no jewelry, just a 1,000-yard stare that made Levin shift his weight uncomfortably. And something's wrong, she said. Wrong how? Mara looked back toward the valley. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of dust and distant fires. It was too clean, she said. The setup, the timing, they knew exactly where to hit, exactly when, like they'd been watching for days, waiting. Ambush, Levin said. Taliban's been doing that since not Taliban. Mara's voice was flat. Certain. This was professional, coordinated. The charges were buried deep, mil-spec date cord, not homemade. The shooters had discipline. They didn't spray and pray. They picked targets, controlled fire. And when Alpha started to break contact, they didn't chase. They faded. Levin frowned. So, who? I don't know. Mara turned back to her scope. But I know they're still down there, and I know they didn't stick around just to collect brass. You think Vale's alive? It wasn't a question. Mara didn't answer it anyway. Levin sat with that for a moment, then sighed and stood up. Look, I get it. Nobody wants to believe he's gone. Vale's a good dude, best CO I've had, but Cap's right. We can't just throw more bodies at this. Not without confirmation. Not without... I'm not asking for bodies, Mara said. I'm asking for time. Time for what? To watch. Levin looked at her like she'd suggested they invade Pakistan. Kincaid, you've been on glass for 11 hours straight. You need sleep, food, something. I need to know if he's alive. And if he's not, Mara's jaw tightened, then I'll know. Levin opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head and started walking back toward the TOC, Tactical Operations Center, a glorified shipping container filled with radios and bad coffee. You're going to burn out, he called over his shoulder. Mara didn't respond. She went back to her scope. The valley breathed. That's how Mara thought of it, like a living thing. Inhale. Shadows lengthening, temperature dropping, wind picking up. Exhale. Stillness, silence, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. She'd been watching it for hours now, watching the way the thermal bloom faded from the impact sites, watching the heat signatures of the enemy patrol as they moved through the low ground, checking bodies, collecting gear. Professional. Methodical. No celebration. No looting. Just work. They were looking for something, or someone. Mara's finger rested lightly on the trigger guard. Not tense, not ready to fire, just aware. The Barrett was a beast of a weapon, 30 pounds unloaded, recoil-like getting kicked by a mule, and loud enough to announce your position to everyone within 2 miles. You didn't shoot it unless you meant it, but God, it felt good to have it ready. Her radio crackled. Overwatch, TOC, you still awake out there? She keyed the mic. Affirmative. Captain wants to see you? Debrief in 5. Mara's eyes didn't leave the optic. Tell him I'm watching the valley. A pause. Then a different voice. Gruff. Annoyed. Definitely Captain Renner. Kincaid, this isn't a request. Didn't say it was, sir. I need you in the TOC, now. Respectfully, sir, you need me here more. The silence stretched. Mara could almost hear Renner's teeth grinding through the radio static. You got something? He asked finally. Not yet. Then get your ass in here. Sir? That's an order, Sergeant. Mara's finger tightened on the mic, then released. She took a slow breath, eyes still locked on the valley, and keyed up one last time. On my way. She pulled back from the Barrett, her knees cracking as she stood. The cold had settled into her joints, the kind of stiffness that came from hours of immobility. She slung her rifle, an M4 with an ACOG, nothing fancy, and started the walk back to the TOC. The base was quieter now. Most of Alpha Team had disappeared into the barracks or the aid station. A few support guys were refueling the Chinook, their movements slow and mechanical. Nobody made eye contact. The TOC was lit up like a Christmas tree, blue-white glow from computer screens, red overhead lights to preserve night vision, and the constant hum of generators. Inside it smelled like sweat, instant coffee, and the faint ozone tang of overworked electronics. Captain Renner stood in the center, arms crossed, staring at a map of the valley that had been marked up with red grease pencil. Ambush site. Extraction point. Last known position. He didn't look up when Mara entered. Close the door, he said. She did. Renner finally turned to face her. He looked older than he had this morning, lines deeper, eyes harder, the kind of aging that happened in hours, not years. You were on Overwatch for the entire op, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. And you saw what happened to Vale. Mara hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but Renner caught it. I saw him go down, she said carefully. I saw the ground collapse. I saw him fall into the ravine. And after? Heavy smoke. Thermals were useless. By the time it cleared, the enemy had closed in. I couldn't get a clean angle. Renner's jaw worked. So you didn't see a body? No, sir. Didn't see him get shot? No, sir. But you also didn't see him walk away? Mara met his eyes. No, sir. I didn't. Renner looked back at the map, at the red X marking the ravine. His hand drifted to it, fingers brushing the grease pencil like he could erase it if he pressed hard enough. His tracker went offline at 21:47 hours, Renner said quietly. Beacon never activated. Radio's been silent for 3 hours, and the enemy's still swarming that valley like ants on a corpse. He looked up. What am I supposed to do with that, Kincaid? What am I supposed to tell his wife, his kids? Mara's throat tightened. She didn't have an answer, not one that would help. I'm sorry, sir, she said. Renner nodded slowly. Then he straightened, rolling his shoulders back, putting the armor back on. I'm calling it, he said. KIA, presumed. We'll send a recovery team when the valley cools down. Maybe in a week, maybe 2. But we're not going back in tonight. Understood, sir. I need you to write up your report. Everything you saw, times, positions, enemy count. I want it on my desk by 0600. Yes, sir. Renner turned away, dismissing her, but Mara didn't move. Sir? He glanced back, eyebrows raised. What if he's still alive? The question hung in the air like smoke. Renner's face went very still. He's not, Renner said. But if he is, he's not, Sergeant. The words came out harder this time, sharper. And even if by some miracle he survived the fall, survived the smoke, survived the enemy patrol that's been grid-searching that ravine for the last 3 hours, even then, we don't have the assets to pull him out. Not tonight. Not without losing more men. So we just leave him. We make the smart call. Renner's voice softened, just a fraction. I know you don't want to hear that. I know it feels wrong, but that's command, Kincaid. Sometimes the smart call and the right call aren't the same thing, and sometimes you don't get to choose. Mara stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, the math, the cold calculus of war. 1 life versus 12, probable death versus certain risk. She hated it, but she understood it. Dismissed, Renner said quietly. Mara saluted, sharp, professional, and turned toward the door. Kincaid. She stopped. Renner was looking at her now, really looking, and for the first time she saw something other than command in his eyes. Something raw. Grief, maybe. Or guilt. If you think of something, he said, anything that changes the math, you tell me. Understood? Yes, sir. She left. Outside, the night air hit her like a slap, cold, dry, tasting of dust and distant artillery. Mara stood on the plywood walkway outside the TOC, breathing it in, letting it clear her head. She could go to the barracks, grab 4 hours of sleep, write the report, do her job. Or she looked east toward the perimeter berm, toward her rifle. If you think of something that changes the math. Mara started walking. The base was settling into its night rhythm now. Guards changing shifts, diesel generators chugging, the occasional burst of radio chatter. Nobody stopped her. Nobody asked where she was going. Overwatch snipers were ghosts even on their own base. People forgot you were there. She climbed back up to her position, the Barrett exactly where she'd left it, and dropped into her familiar crouch behind the scope. The valley stared back. For a long time, she just watched. Let her breathing slow. Let her heartbeat settle. This was meditation for her. This stillness, this focus. The rest of the world could spin itself into chaos, but behind the scope, everything made sense. Distance, wind, angle, math. The thermal overlay showed the enemy patrol moving in a standard search pattern now, 2-man teams, leapfrogging, covering each other. They'd abandoned the impact site and were focusing on the ravine, right where Vale had fallen. Mara's jaw tightened. They're looking for him. Which meant what? That they knew he was alive? That they wanted confirmation? Or just that they were thorough, professional, and didn't leave loose ends? She didn't know. But she was going to find out. She switched the optic to maximum magnification, narrowing the field of view to a tight cone focused on the ravine entrance. The image degraded slightly, pixelated, grainy, but still usable. And then she waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. The enemy patrol moved on, disappearing into the high ground. The valley went quiet again. Empty. Mara's eyes burned, her back ached. The cold had turned her fingers stiff and clumsy. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up, stretch, get some blood flow back. She didn't, because she'd learned a long time ago that the world reveals itself to those who wait, not to the loud, not to the hasty, to the patient. And at 01:47 hours, the world revealed something. A heat signature. Faint. Barely there, but there. Mara's breath caught. She adjusted focus, dialed in the thermal gain, trying to pull more detail from the image. The signature was low to the ground, tucked against the western wall of the ravine. Not moving. Not spreading like residual heat from an explosion. Compact. Contained. Biological. Her heart started to pound. She zoomed in further, pushing the optic to its limit. The image swam, then stabilized. And there, just for a second, she saw it. A shape. Human-sized. And then it moved. Not much. Just a shift. A repositioning. But enough. Enough to prove it wasn't debris. Enough to prove it was alive. Mara's hand shot to her radio. TOC, Overwatch. Static. Then Levin's voice, thick with sleep. Go ahead, Overwatch. I need you to wake up Captain Renner. A pause. It's 0200, Kincaid. This better be... I have a possible survivor in the valley. The line went dead silent. Then, say again? Thermal contact, ravine sector, single individual, minimal movement, but definitely biological. Could be enemy. Could be. Mara's voice was steady, calm, but her hands were shaking. Or it could be Vale. Another pause, longer this time. Stand by. The radio clicked off. Mara didn't move, didn't breathe. She kept her eye locked on that heat signature, terrified it would vanish, that she'd imagined it, that this was just exhaustion and hope playing tricks on her brain. But it didn't vanish. It shifted again, slowly, painfully. And then, God, she almost missed it. There was a flicker of movement near the shoulder, repetitive, rhythmic, like someone tightening something around their leg. Tourniquet. Mara's breath came out in a rush. TOC, overwatch. Go ahead, Renner's voice this time, awake, alert. I'm observing what appears to be self-aid being administered. Tourniquet application, left leg. Silence. Then, you're sure? I'm sure. Kincaid, Renner's voice was strained, torn. I need you to be absolutely certain, because if you're wrong, I'm watching him right now, sir. Mara's voice was rock steady. No doubt, no hesitation. He's alive. The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought the connection had dropped. Then Renner's voice came back, quiet and raw. Jesus Christ. Within 15 minutes, the TOC was packed. Renner, Hayes, 4 other operators from Alpha Team, an intelligence officer Mara didn't recognize, and a major from Battalion who'd apparently been sleeping in the next compound over and had jogged across in his PT uniform and body armor. They crowded around the thermal feed Mara had piped into the TOC's monitor system, watching the grainy image of the heat signature in the ravine. That could be anything, the intel officer said. He was young, clean-shaven, and clearly hadn't spent much time outside the wire. Residual heat from... It's not residual, Mara said flatly. She was standing beside the monitor, arms crossed, exhaustion pulling at her like gravity. Residual heat dissipates. This is contained. And it's moving. Barely. Enough. The major, a squared-away ranger type with a salt and pepper flat top, leaned closer to the screen. Can you get better resolution? That is better resolution, sir. I'm already pushing the optic past its effective range. What about the drone? Renner shook his head. Shadow's down for maintenance. Won't be back up until tomorrow night. Predator? 2-hour response time, minimum. The major swore under his breath. Hayes, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. His voice was tight, controlled. We need to go get him. Negative, Renner said immediately. Valley's still hot. Enemy's still active. We go in there blind. We're not blind. We have overwatch. Hayes jabbed a finger at Mara. She can guide us in, same way she kept us alive the first time. Mara blinked. She hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected Hayes to even acknowledge she'd been there. But Renner was already shaking his head. Even with overwatch, we don't have the assets. We'd need birds. We'd need a QRF on standby. We have him, Hayes interrupted, pointing at the screen. Our commander, bleeding out in a ditch. And we're standing here talking about assets? Watch your tone, Sergeant. Sir, with respect, enough. The major's voice cut through the argument like a blade. He turned to Mara. Sergeant Kincaid, professional opinion. Can a team make it in and out without getting shredded? Mara looked at the screen. At the thermal image of Aaron Vale. Because it was him, she knew it in her bones, fighting to stay alive in a hole in the ground. Not tonight, she said. Hayes made a noise like he'd been punched. But, Mara continued, if we wait until dawn, enemy activity drops. They pull back to avoid our air assets. There's a 2-hour window, small team, fast in, fast out. It's doable. That's 6 hours from now, Hayes said. He might not have 6 hours. He's lasted this long. On a blown-out leg and God knows what other injuries. Hayes's voice cracked. Sir, we can't just... We're not abandoning him. Renner's voice was firm, final. But we're also not throwing lives away on a cowboy rescue. He looked at the major. Sir? The major studied the screen for another long moment. Then he nodded. We go at first light, Alpha Team, supported by Overwatch. Fast rope in, extract, and exfil before the enemy knows we're there. Sir, Hayes started. That's the call, Sergeant. The major turned to Renner. Get your men ready. I want a full plan on my desk in 2 hours. Yes, sir. The room started to empty. Hayes lingered for a moment, staring at the screen, before finally turning and walking out without a word. Mara stayed. So did Renner. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just watched the heat signature shift and settle, shift and settle. A man fighting death, one shallow breath at a time. "You saved his life tonight," Renner said quietly. Mara shook her head. "Not yet. You gave him a chance. That's more than he had an hour ago." She looked at him, at the lines in his face, the weight in his eyes. "You were going to leave him," she said, not accusing, just stating fact. Renner's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I was. Why? Because I thought he was dead, and I thought going back for a body would get more of my men killed." He looked at her. "You ever had to make that call?" "No, sir." "Hope you never do." He turned back to the screen. "But if you do, you'll understand why I'm not thanking you right now." Mara frowned. "Sir?" "Because now I have to send men back into that valley, back into a kill zone. And if any of them don't come home," he trailed off, swallowed hard. "That's on me, and on you, and on that stubborn bastard down there who didn't have the decency to die clean." He walked out. Mara stood alone in the TOC, watching the screen, and felt the weight of what she'd done settle onto her shoulders. He's alive, which means now we have to save him, or die trying. She went back to her scope. The rest of the base slept, or tried to. But Mara couldn't, wouldn't. Not while Vale was down there, alone, bleeding, waiting for a rescue that might not come in time. So she watched. And as the hours crawled toward dawn, as the stars wheeled overhead and the cold deepened and her body screamed for rest, Mara Kincaid kept her eye on the valley, because someone had to. Because no one else would. And because she'd be damned if she let Commander Aaron Vale die alone in the dark after coming this far. The eastern sky was just starting to gray, not light yet, but the promise of it, when her radio crackled one last time. "Overwatch, Alpha Actual, we're moving in 30 minutes. Mara keyed her mic, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. "Copy, Alpha Actual, I have eyes on." "Good." A pause. Then Renner's voice, quieter, almost human. "Keep them on him, Kincaid. Don't let him slip away now." "Roger that, sir." The line went dead. Mara adjusted her scope one last time, centering the reticle on the ravine, on the faint heat signature that was all that remained of a man who'd led them into hell and was somehow still fighting to get out. And then she waited for the dawn. Dawn came slow and cold, bleeding gray light across the valley like ink spreading through water. The floodlights at Razor Point clicked off one by one, and in their absence the base looked smaller, more fragile, a collection of plywood and hope surrounded by mountains that didn't care whether anyone lived or died. Mara hadn't moved from her position. Her joints had gone past aching into a kind of numb acceptance, her eyes dry and burning from hours of staring through the optic. But the heat signature was still there. Weaker now, the thermal bloom fading as Vale's body temperature dropped, but present. Fighting. She heard them before she saw them. The soft crunch of boots on gravel, the metallic click of gear being checked and rechecked. Alpha Team was moving into position at the helipads, their silhouettes dark against the lightening sky. 8 men this time. Not 12. Renner had left 4 behind, probably the wounded, probably the ones who'd protest the loudest about being left out. Her radio clicked. "Overwatch, Alpha Actual, status on target?" Mara keyed her mic, voice rough from disuse. "Target stable. Minimal movement. No change in enemy activity. Valley's quiet." Too quiet? She watched the thermal feed for another few seconds, scanning the high ground, the approach routes, the places where an ambush would make sense. Nothing. Just empty stone and morning shadows. "Negative. They pulled back an hour ago. Standard pattern. They don't like operating in daylight." "Copy." A pause. "We're wheels up in 5. Stay on glass." "Roger." The line went dead. Mara adjusted her position slightly, feeling the Barrett's weight settle against her shoulder, and watched the Chinook's rotors start to turn. The sound built slowly. A whine, then a thrum, Then a roar that shook the air and sent dust spiraling in angry circles. The bird lifted, nose dipping forward, and banked hard toward the valley. This was it. The moment where everything either worked or fell apart. Mara's finger rested lightly on the trigger. She wasn't planning to shoot, not unless she had to, but the weight of it was comforting. A promise. She'd kept Vale alive this long through sheer force of will and a stubborn refusal to look away. She wasn't about to let him die now because she blinked at the wrong moment. The Chinook dropped fast and low, hugging the terrain, rotors kicking up plumes of dust that turned the world into a brown-out chaos of noise and grit. Mara lost visual for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, before the bird flared hard and the rear ramp dropped. Alpha Team poured out like water. Fast ropes weren't an option this close to the ground, so they just ran. 8 men hitting the dirt in a staggered line, weapons up, moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from doing this 100 times before. Renner was first off, his rifle sweeping left as haze covered right. Behind them, a medic with an oversized ruck, a breacher carrying a collapsible litter, and 4 assaulters who moved like shadows. The Chinook didn't wait. It lifted the moment the last boot touched ground, rotors clawing for altitude, and disappeared back toward Razor Point, trailing a rooster tail of dust. And then the valley was silent again. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, keeping her hands steady as she tracked the team's movement through her optic. They were moving in a tactical column now, spacing tight but not claustrophobic, each man covering a different sector. Professional, controlled. But she could see the tension in their postures. The way Hayes' head moved just a little too fast, scanning, searching. The way Renner's shoulders were set like he was walking into a fight he didn't expect to win. Overwatch, Alpha Actual. We're at phase line red, moving to objective. Mara scanned ahead of them, checking the high ground, the dead space, the corners where death liked to hide. Still nothing. The enemy had really pulled back. Or they were waiting. Patience was a weapon too. Copy Alpha Actual. Path is clear. No movement. Roger. The team pushed forward, eating up the distance in long, ground-covering strides that would have looked casual to an untrained eye, but were actually a carefully calibrated balance of speed and readiness. They reached the mouth of the ravine in under 3 minutes, and Renner held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Mara watched Renner scan the ravine entrance, his rifle muzzle tracking invisible threats. She knew what he was seeing, a natural choke point, walls pressing in on both sides, limited visibility. 1,000 places for someone to hide an IED or set up a crossfire. A tactician's nightmare. Overwatch. Alpha Actual. Thermals showing anything inside? Mara switched her optic to thermal, narrowing the focus to the ravine interior. The walls glowed faintly with residual heat from yesterday's sun, but deeper in, tucked against the western wall, that familiar signature pulsed weakly. Affirm. Target is approximately 30 meters in west wall. Still stationary. Any other signatures? She swept the entire ravine, looking for the telltale bloom of human body heat or the sharper, more compact signature of recent explosives. Nothing. Negative. You're clear. Copy. Moving in. Renner gestured forward and the team flowed into the ravine like smoke, 2 men on point, weapons tracking high and low, the rest staggered behind them in overlapping fields of fire. The walls swallowed them quickly, cutting off Mara's line of sight. She hated this part, hated the blindness. From her position, she could protect them on the approach, guide them around threats, give them God's eye view of the battlefield. But inside the ravine, they were on their own. She was useless. Her radio crackled with harsh breathing and the soft scrape of boots on stone. No voices. Just movement. Professional silence. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. Mara's hands tightened on the Barrett, knuckles white. She wanted to call out, ask for a status update, confirm they were okay. But radio discipline existed for a reason. Voices carried, gave away positions, got people killed. So she waited. And then Hayes' voice came through, tight and strained. Contact. We got him. Mara's breath rushed out. Thank God. He's in bad shape. The relief evaporated. How bad? Renner's voice, calm but with an edge that could cut glass. Legs shattered, compound fracture, bone through the skin, tourniquets holding, but he's lost a lot of blood. Face is gray, pulse is weak. A pause. Cap, I don't know if he's going to make the ride back. Mara's stomach dropped. Get the medic on him. Now. Already here. A new voice. The medic. Young, but steady. Starting fluids. Checking for additional injuries. More breathing. The sound of gear being moved. A suppressed grunt of pain that might have been Vale. Might have been one of the team lifting him. Mara stared at the ravine entrance, willing them to emerge, to get back into the open where she could protect them. Multiple rib fractures, the medic continued, his voice clinical now, detached. Possible internal bleeding. Headlack, probably concussive. Sir, we need to move him carefully or we're going to make things worse. We don't have carefully, Renner said. We have fast. Get him on the litter. We're leaving. Cap, that's an order. Move. Mara heard the sounds of the team shifting, reorganizing, preparing for extract. She scanned the valley again, checking their egress route, making sure the path back to the LZ was still clear. It was. For now. But the morning light was getting stronger, the shadows shorter. Their window was closing. Overwatch Alpha Actual, we're coming out. Have the bird on standby. Roger. Bird's inbound. ETA 3 minutes. Make it 2. Mara switched channels, relaying the message to the Chinook pilot. The response was immediate. Rotors already spooling up, crew chiefs prepping the medical bay. They knew the drill. Get in. Get the wounded. Get out. Everything else was noise. The first man emerged from the ravine at a run. Hayes, rifle up, moving backward, covering the exit. Then 2 more, flanking. Then the litter team, 4 men carrying a collapsible stretcher between them, moving fast but controlled, their burdens strapped down and secured. Mara's optic found Vale's face through the thermal wash. Even at this distance, even through the green-gray blur of the scope, she could see how still he was. Too still. The kind of stillness that lived right next to death. Move, move, move! Renner's voice over the radio, urgent now. We're exposed. They were. The ravine had given them cover, but now they were back in the open, visible from a dozen different vantage points. Mara's finger slid to the trigger, her breathing slowing, entering that calm space where time stretched and the world narrowed to crosshairs and windage. She swept the high ground methodically. Ridge to the north, clear. Outcropping to the east, clear. The collapsed building they'd taken fire from yesterday. Movement. Her heart stopped. A figure, dark against the pale stone, rising from behind a pile of rubble. A K-47 in hand, muzzle tracking toward Alpha Team. Mara didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't radio a warning. She just fired. The Barrett roared, the recoil slamming into her shoulder like a truck. The sound so loud it felt like the world breaking open. 8 clicks away, the figure jerked and fell backward, disappearing behind the rubble. Contact right! Renner's voice, sharp. Overwatch, say again your last. 1 hostile down, Mara said calmly, already working the bolt, chambering another round. North Ridge, checking for additional. Because there were always additional, always. 1 fighter never worked alone. She swept left and found 2 more, scrambling into position, weapons coming up. She fired again. The Barrett's muzzle flash was like a camera flash in broad daylight, impossible to miss, and the round punched through a man's center mass and dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. The second fighter saw his partner fall and froze, just for a heartbeat, just long enough. Mara fired a 3rd time. Another hit. Another body. 3 down, she reported, continuing to scan. Alpha Team was sprinting now, all pretense of tactical movement abandoned in favor of raw speed. The Chinook roared overhead, flaring hard, the pilot putting the bird exactly where it needed to be without being told. The rear ramp was already down, crew chiefs leaning out with rifles, adding their firepower to the mix. More figures were appearing now, pouring out of hiding spots like ants from a kicked nest. Mara counted 6, 8, 10. Too many. She fired again, dropped 1. Fired, dropped another. But they were spreading out, using cover, and she couldn't get clean shots on all of them. Rounds started kicking up dirt around Alpha Team. Someone stumbled, not hit, just tripping over the rough ground, and 2 teammates grabbed him, hauled him upright, kept moving. The litter team didn't slow. their burden bouncing between them, Vale's body jerking with each impact but still strapped down, still secure. 30 seconds, the pilot's voice tight with focus. Get on the bird! Hayes reached the ramp first, turned, and started laying down suppressive fire while the litter team hauled Vale up and inside. The crew chiefs grabbed the stretcher, pulling, and then Vale was disappearing into the Chinook's dark interior. Mara kept firing. Controlled pairs now, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. A fighter appeared from behind a wall and she hit him in the shoulder, spinning him. Another tried to dash between cover points and she caught him mid-stride. The Barrett's magazine ran dry. She dropped it, slapped in a fresh one, chambered around. 5 seconds. 5 seconds where she wasn't providing cover. 5 seconds where Alpha Team was on their own. But they were boarding now, scrambling up the ramp in a chaotic pile of gear and adrenaline. Renner went last, firing his rifle one-handed while grabbing the ramp's edge with the other, hauling himself aboard even as the Chinook started to lift. Clear, clear, go! Renner's voice. The helicopter's nose dipped and it surged forward, rotors screaming, gaining altitude and distance in a stomach-dropping climb that put half a mountain between it and the enemy in under 10 seconds. Mara watched them go, watched until the Chinook was just a dark speck against the morning sky, and only then did she pull back from her scope. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the adrenaline crash, the sudden silence after the Barrett's thunder, the realization that it was over. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. She keyed her radio with numb fingers. Alpha Actual, Overwatch, good effect on target, Valley is secure. Static. Then Renner's voice, breathless and raw. Kincaid, you just saved our asses. Just doing my job, sir. Like hell. A pause, filled with the sound of the helicopter and shouted orders and the chaos of emergency medical treatment. We're RTB, see you on the ground. The line clicked off. Mara sat back, feeling the exhaustion slam into her like a physical thing. Her eyes burned. Her shoulder ached from the Barrett's recoil. Her fingers were cramping from hours of holding the same position. But Vale was alive. Barely. Maybe not for long, but alive. She allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to feel good about that. Then she started breaking down her position, packing her gear, preparing for the walk back to base. Because the job wasn't done. Wouldn't be done until Vale was stable, until the valley was truly secure, until every loose end was tied off. The walk back felt longer than it should have. The base was already stirring, word spreading fast the way it always did in small military outposts. People were gathering near the helipads, watching the eastern sky, waiting. Mara bypassed them all, heading straight for the aid station. She arrived just as the Chinook touched down, the ramp dropping before the wheels even settled, and the medical team swarmed aboard. They moved with practiced efficiency. Backboard, cervical collar, IV bags held high, a forest of hands lifting and carrying and stabilizing. Vale disappeared into the aid station in under 30 seconds, leaving behind a trail of bloody boot prints and the kind of silence that meant everyone was holding their breath. Mara stood outside, gear still slung over her shoulder, watching through the open door as the medics worked, cutting away bloody uniforms, starting more IVs, calling out vitals in that clipped, urgent shorthand that meant things were bad, but not hopeless. Hayes emerged from the aid station, his face pale, blood on his hands that he hadn't bothered to wipe off. He saw Mara and stopped. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hayes walked over, stopped a few feet away, and looked at her with eyes that were older than they'd been yesterday. They said he wouldn't have lasted another hour, Hayes said quietly. If we'd waited. If you hadn't seen him. He swallowed hard. Thank you. Mara shook her head. Don't thank me yet. He's not out of the woods. But he's got a chance. Because of you. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to accept gratitude for something that felt like basic human decency. So she just nodded and turned to go. Kincaid. She looked back. Hayes was standing straighter now, some of the weight lifting off his shoulders. I'm sorry, for earlier, for thinking you didn't belong out there with us. You never said that. Didn't have to. He gave her a small, tired smile. But I was wrong. You're one of us now. Whether you like it or not. He walked away before she could respond, heading back toward the barracks, leaving Mara standing alone in the growing daylight. One of us. She'd been in the military for 8 years, been on a dozen deployments, saved lives, taken lives, done things she'd never talk about in polite company. But she'd always been separate, apart. The Overwatch sniper, the lone wolf, the one who watched from a distance while others did the real work. Except this time, the distance hadn't mattered. This time, she'd been exactly where she needed to be. She was halfway to the barracks when her radio crackled one last time. "Sergeant Kincaid, report to the TOC." Renner's voice. Formal. Official. She changed direction, feeling fresh dread settle into her stomach. Formal meant paperwork. Or worse, debriefing. Questions about rules of engagement, about why she'd fired without verbal warning, about whether her kills had been justified. The TOC was quieter now, just Renner and the intel officer from last night, both of them looking at a laptop screen. They glanced up when she entered. Renner gestured to a chair. "Sit." She sat, setting her rifle carefully against the wall. "How many did you drop?" Renner asked. 5 confirmed, maybe 6. The last one went down behind cover, couldn't confirm the kill. The intel officer made a note. Renner just nodded slowly. "You probably saved half my team," he said. "Maybe more." Don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't say just doing my job. What you did out there was exceptional. Textbook Overwatch. Hell, better than textbook." He paused. "I'm putting you in for a commendation." Mara blinked. "Sir, that's not necessary." "It's already done. Bronze Star, probably. Maybe higher." He leaned back. "You earned it." She didn't know what to say. Medals had never mattered to her. She didn't shoot people for recognition. She did it because someone had to, and she was the one with the rifle. But looking at Renner's face, at the genuine respect there, she realized this wasn't about her. It was about him, about the team, about acknowledging that they'd needed help and she'd given it without asking for anything in return. So she nodded. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing." He glanced at the intel officer. "That's all? Dismissed." Mara stood, grabbed her rifle, and walked out into the morning sun. The base felt different now. Or maybe she did. People looked at her as she passed. Not stares, just glances, nods of acknowledgement. Word had spread. The sniper who found Vale, who guided the team in, who dropped 5 hostiles in under 2 minutes and made it look easy. She didn't want the attention. Didn't want to be the story everyone told over breakfast. But she understood it was part of the cost. You couldn't pull off something like this and expect to stay invisible. Her bunk was exactly as she'd left it. Gear scattered, sleeping bag half unrolled, a paperback novel face down on the plywood floor. She stowed her rifle, stripped off her outer layer of filthy gear, and collapsed onto the thin mattress. She should sleep. Her body was screaming for it, but her mind was still racing, replaying the morning's events in sharp, stuttering loops. The heat signature, the Chinook, the figures rising from the rubble, the Barrett's recoil punching into her shoulder again and again. She closed her eyes anyway, forcing her breathing to slow, and somewhere in that forced calm she felt herself starting to drift. But just before sleep took her, her mind conjured one last image. Vale's face, gray and still on that stretcher, fighting for every breath. And the question that followed her down into unconsciousness was simple and terrible. What if he doesn't make it? She woke to shouting. Not the normal kind, not training or horseplay or someone getting chewed out for a minor infraction. Real shouting, panicked, the kind that meant something had gone very wrong. Mara was on her feet before she was fully conscious, muscle memory taking over. She grabbed her rifle, checked the chamber out of habit, and pushed through the barracks door into harsh afternoon light. The base was in motion. People running toward the aid station, others running away from it, radios crackling with overlapping voices. And underneath it all, a sound that made her blood freeze. The flatline alarm. She ran. The aid station's door was propped open, revealing a scene of controlled chaos inside. Medics working over a figure on the table. Blood. Lots of it. Someone calling for more O negative. Someone else shouting numbers that meant nothing to Mara, but clearly meant everything to the medical team. And there, stepping back from the table with his hands up, was the lead medic. His face was pale, defeated. Time of death? No. Hayes's voice raw and furious. He was standing in the corner, fists clenched, looking like he wanted to punch through a wall. "No, you don't get to call it. Try again." "Sergeant, we've been working on him for—" "I said try again." The medic looked at him with something like pity, then looked back at the body on the table. Vale's body. Mara's world tilted. The rifle suddenly felt too heavy in her hands. She'd pulled him out. She'd saved him. She'd— "Clear!" someone shouted. The defibrillator hummed and thumped, Vale's body jerking on the table. Nothing. Again! Thump. Nothing. Mara turned away, unable to watch. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. You didn't fight that hard, survive that long, get pulled out of hell by sheer stubborn refusal to die, only to code on the operating table 20 minutes later. But the universe didn't care about fairness. It never had. She was walking away, numb and hollow, when she heard it. A gasp. Then, "I've got a pulse!" She spun around. Through the door, she could see the medics clustered around the table again, moving with renewed urgency. Someone was adjusting an IV. Someone else was checking monitors. And there, faint but unmistakable, was the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Not flatline, not dead, alive. Hayes appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with something that might have been tears or sweat, or both. He saw Mara standing there and his expression cracked into something between a laugh and a sob. "He's back," Hayes said. "Son of a bitch came back." But before Mara could respond, before she could process what this meant, someone grabbed her arm. It was Renner, and his face was grim. "We've got a problem," he said quietly, pulling her away from the aid station. "Intel just intercepted enemy comms. They know we pulled someone out, and they know we sent a sniper." Mara's stomach dropped. "So? So they're putting a price on your head, and they're coming to collect." Mara stared at Renner, processing his words through the exhaustion that made everything feel slightly unreal. "A price? How much? Does it matter?" Renner's voice was flat. "They want you dead. They're mobilizing every asset in the province. Intel's picking up chatter from cells we didn't even know existed. Because I killed 5 of their fighters? Because you humiliated them." Renner pulled her further from the aid station toward the TOC, his grip tight on her arm. "They set an ambush, killed or thought they killed an American commander, had the whole valley locked down. And then one American sniper, working alone, spots their prize still breathing, guides in a rescue team and drops half a squad while they're trying to stop it." He looked at her hard. "You made them look incompetent. In their world, that's worse than killing their men." The TOC was buzzing when they entered. The intel officer from earlier was hunched over his laptop, headphones on, fingers flying across the keyboard. The major who'd authorized the rescue was there too, along with 2 other officers Mara didn't recognize. Maps covered every surface. Radio chatter filled the air in overlapping streams of static and urgent voices. "Bring her up to speed," the major said without looking up from his map. The intel officer pulled off his headphones. His eyes were bloodshot, his coffee cup leaving rings on classified documents. "We've got positive ID on at least 3 separate groups converging on our position. Mix of Taliban and what we think are foreign fighters. Maybe Chechen, maybe Pakistani ISI-backed. They're moving fast, bypassing their usual routes, ignoring our patrols in other sectors." "How many?" Mara asked. "Conservative estimate? 80 to 100 fighters. Could be more." The number hit her like cold water. 100 fighters. Against a forward base that held maybe 50 personnel, most of them support staff, not combat troops. "When?" Renner asked. "Best guess? They hit us before nightfall, maybe sooner." The intel officer tapped his screen. "They're not being subtle about it either. They want us to know they're coming." "Psychological warfare," one of the other officers said. He was older, graying at the temples, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen too many deployments. "They want us scared, want us to make mistakes." Mara felt every eye in the room turned toward her. Not hostile, not blaming, just calculating, weighing options, measuring risk. "We could evac her," Renner said. "Get her out on the next supply bird. Pull her back to Bagram." "And show weakness?" The major shook his head. "They'd spin that as a victory. American sniper runs away, abandons her post. No." "Sir, with respect, Keeping her here makes this base a target. This base is already a target. The Major's voice was hard, final. Has been since the day we built it. What changes now is we know they're coming and we know why. That gives us an advantage. How is painting a bullseye on one of our own an advantage? Renner's voice was rising, frustration bleeding through his professional calm. Because they'll commit resources they wouldn't normally waste on a place like Razor Point. They'll expose themselves, make mistakes, and when they do, we'll be ready. The Major turned to Mara. You up for this, Sergeant? She met his eyes, saw the question behind the question. Are you willing to be bait? Are you willing to risk not just your life, but everyone else's on the chance we can turn this around? Yes, sir. Good. He turned back to the map. We've got 6 hours, maybe less. Let's make them count. The next 4 hours were a blur of preparation that felt both frantic and methodical. Razor Point transformed from a sleepy forward base into a hardened defensive position. Every fighting position was reinforced. Fields of fire were cleared. Claymores and tripwires went into the ground in overlapping patterns designed to channel attackers into kill zones. The mortar team zeroed their tubes on pre-plotted coordinates. The few heavy machine guns the base possessed were mounted in sandbags stacked around them until the gunners were sitting in miniature bunkers. Mara found herself assigned to the easternmost guard tower, the one with the best view of the valley approach, the one that would see the enemy coming first. It was also the most exposed, the furthest from support, and the first position that would get overrun if the defenses collapsed. She didn't complain. Hayes found her there as she was setting up the Barrett, adjusting the bipod, checking the elevation. He climbed the wooden ladder without asking permission and dropped a case of ammunition beside her. Thought you might need these, he said. Thanks. He didn't leave, just stood there, looking out at the valley, at the mountains that had already swallowed so many lives and were preparing to swallow more. This is because of Vale, isn't it? He said quietly. Because we went back for him. This is because they're extremists who hate us and everything we represent, Mara said. Vale's just an excuse. I'm just an excuse. They'd find a reason to attack eventually. But we gave them a reason now. She looked at him, really looked, saw the guilt there, the second guessing, the weight of wondering if saving one man was worth risking 50. You'd do it again, she said. It wasn't a question. Hayes was silent for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, I would. Then stop looking for reasons to regret it. He smiled, small and tired. You're scary, you know that? Good. Maybe they'll think twice before they come up here. Hayes started back down the ladder, then paused. Hey, Kincaid, when this is over, first round's on me. Make it 2, and you've got a deal. He laughed, the sound strange and out of place in the tense air, and disappeared below. Mara went back to her preparations. She'd brought more than just the Barrett. Her M4 leaned against the tower's rail, loaded and ready. Her sidearm, a Beretta M9 that had seen better days, was secure in its holster. Spare magazines lined her vest in neat rows. 2 fragmentary grenades hung from her gear just in case things got desperate enough to need them. She'd also brought water, energy bars, and a single morphine auto-injector that she hoped she wouldn't need but knew better than to go without. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks when the radio crackled. All positions TOC. We've got movement, multiple contacts. Eastern Valley, 3 clicks out. Mara's hands moved automatically, bringing the Barrett up, settling in behind the scope. She dialed in the magnification and began scanning the valley floor. At first, nothing. Just stone and shadow and the long slant of afternoon light. Then she saw them. Not individuals yet, just movement. Shapes flowing between rocks, using the terrain, advancing in a loose skirmish line that suggested training and discipline. She counted 20 in the first group, then spotted another group further north, then another to the south. They were flanking, spreading out, making themselves harder to hit, harder to pin down. TOC, overwatch. I've got eyes on. Estimate 40 to 50 fighters visible. Multiple groups. They're positioning for a coordinated assault. Copy, overwatch. All positions, weapons hold. Let them close. The waiting was worse than the movement. Mara watched them advance, watched them use cover and concealment like professionals, watched them set up machine gun positions and mortar teams in spots that gave them good fields of fire on the base's weak points. They knew what they were doing. Whoever was leading this wasn't some half-trained militia commander. This was someone who understood combined arms, fire, and maneuver, how to apply pressure to multiple points simultaneously. Overwatch, TOC, what's your assessment? Mara took a breath, forcing objectivity into her voice. They're good, sir. Real good. Former military, maybe? They've got heavy weapons, crew serve support, and they're not rushing. They're setting up properly. Can we hold? She scanned the base's defenses, the improved positions, the clear fields of fire, the interlocking sectors, then looked back at the enemy force, still growing as more fighters emerged from the valley. If they commit everything at once, maybe. If they're smart and hit us in waves, wear us down? She paused. It'll be close. That's what I thought. A longer pause. Stay sharp up there, Kincaid. You're going to be priority target number 1. Understood, sir. The radio went silent. Mara settled in, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder, and waited for the war to come to her. It started with mortars. The first rounds fell short, impacting 50 meters outside the wire, geysers of dirt and shrapnel that looked impressive but did no damage. Ranging shots. The enemy crews were walking their fire in, adjusting, finding the correct elevation and deflection. Mara marked their positions through her scope. 2 tubes visible, maybe more hidden. She could take out the crews, but the moment she fired, her position would be compromised. Better to wait. Be patient. The second volley landed inside the wire. 1 round hit near the vehicle depot, shredding a cargo truck. Another impacted the southeast corner, collapsing a section of HESCO barrier. The third fell on the barracks roof, punching through plywood and sandbags, and Mara heard screaming. Incoming! Get to cover! Everyone who could move was already moving, scrambling into bunkers and reinforced positions. The base's own mortars fired back, their tubes coughing rounds into the sky, but counter-battery fire was a numbers game, and the enemy had more tubes. More rounds fell. The base shook. Dust and smoke filled the air. Somewhere behind her, something exploded with a secondary blast that meant fuel or ammunition had cooked off, and then the mortars stopped. Silence crashed down, ringing and absolute. Mara's ears were screaming, her body tensed for the next impact, but it didn't come, which meant the mortars had done their job. Now came the assault. They came from 3 directions simultaneously, east, north, and south, a coordinated push that hit the perimeter like a wave. Muzzle flashes sparked in the gathering dusk. Tracers arced through the air, beautiful and deadly. The heavy machine guns opened up, their deep bark cutting through the chaos. Razor Point's defenders fired back. The sound was overwhelming, rifles and machine guns and grenade launchers all merging into a continuous roar that made thinking difficult and hearing impossible. Mara focused on her breathing, on her sector, on finding targets and making them go away. She saw a fighter with an RPG moving into position behind a boulder. Range, 1,200 meters. Wind, minimal. She adjusted for the slight downward angle, let out half a breath, and squeezed. The Barrett roared. The fighter went down, the RPG tumbling from dead hands. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, found another target, a machine gunner setting up a PKM. Same process. Breathe, adjust, fire. The machine gunner collapsed across his weapon. Overwatch, TOC. Good kills, keep it up. She kept it up. Target after target. Some dropped. Some dove for cover. Some kept coming despite the odds. The Barrett's magazine ran dry, and she reloaded, fingers moving on autopilot, muscle memory taking over while her conscious mind stayed focused through the scope. The enemy was learning, though. They'd figured out where the precision fire was coming from. Rounds started impacting around her position. Not accurate yet, but getting closer. Wood splintered. Sandbags burst. A bullet cracked past her head close enough that she felt the pressure wave. Overwatch? Recommend you relocate. Negative. TOC. I've got the best sightlines from here. You're also the most exposed. An RPG streaked out of the darkness and slammed into the guard tower's base. The structure lurched, wood shrieking, and Mara felt the world tilt. She grabbed the rail, holding on as the tower swayed but didn't fall. Overwatch status! Still here. She was back behind the scope, searching for the RPG gunner. Found him reloading, put a round through his chest before he could fire again. Still in the fight. But the tower was compromised. She could feel it in the way the board shifted under her weight, in the groan of stressed wood and bent nails. One more good hit, and the whole thing would come down. She needed to move. Mara slung the Barrett, grabbed her M4, and started down the ladder. The rungs shook with each step, the whole structure swaying like a tree in a storm. She was halfway down when she heard it, the high-pitched whistle of another incoming RPG. She jumped, hit the ground rolling just as the rocket impacted where she'd been standing 2 seconds earlier. The explosion was a physical force that picked her up and slammed her into a HESCO barrier. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. Blood ran hot down her face from somewhere. But she was alive. She pushed herself up, grabbed her rifle, and ran. The base was chaos. Fires burned in 3 places. The southeast wall had been breached, enemy fighters pouring through the gap, and the defenders were falling back to secondary positions. Mara saw Renner rallying a group near the TOC, his voice cutting through the noise, directing fire, plugging holes in the line. She found a position behind an overturned cargo container, took a knee, and started engaging targets. The M4 barked in her hands, controlled bursts, center mass shots. A fighter went down. Another. The rest scattered, looking for cover. Hayes appeared beside her, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His rifle's stock cracked but still functional. "They're inside the wire," he shouted over the gunfire. "I noticed. We need to push them back before they get to the aid station." Mara looked toward the aid station, saw a group of fighters moving toward it with purpose. Saw the medics inside, unarmed, vulnerable. Saw Vale's stretcher still visible through the doorway. "On me!" she shouted, not waiting to see if Hayes followed. She moved fast, using cover, cutting angles, her rifle up and tracking. A fighter stepped out from behind a wall, and she double-tapped him without breaking stride. Another tried to swing his AK toward her, and Hayes cut him down. They reached the aid station just as the enemy did. Close quarters combat. No time for aiming, just point shooting and controlled aggression. Mara's rifle spoke once, twice, 3 times. Bodies fell. Hayes was beside her, firing, moving, covering her reloads. A fighter lunged at her with a knife, and she slammed the rifle's buttstock into his face, felt bone crunch, brought the muzzle down and fired. Then it was over. 6 bodies on the ground, the aid station secure. The medics were staring at her with wide eyes. One of them was holding a scalpel like a weapon, his hands shaking. "Lock that door," Mara said. "Don't open it for anyone who doesn't give the password." "What's the password?" She looked at Hayes. He shrugged. Mara turned back to the medic. "Nightingale." The medic nodded, already dragging a table toward the door. Mara and Hayes moved back outside, back into the fight. The enemy was regrouping. They'd taken heavy casualties in the initial assault. Mara counted at least 20 bodies in the wire, but they weren't breaking, weren't retreating. They just pulled back, reorganized, and prepared to come again. Professional, disciplined, terrifying. TOC, all positions. They're massing for another push. Conserve ammo. Pick your shots. Mara's M4 magazine was down to 5 rounds. She dropped it, slapped in a fresh one. Her vest still had 4 mags left. Maybe 120 rounds total. The Barrett was somewhere in the rubble of the guard tower, probably buried, possibly destroyed. She was running out of ways to kill people. The second assault came harder and faster. They'd learned from the first wave, knew where the strong points were, knew where to avoid and where to press. They hit the northwest corner with everything they had: RPGs, machine gun fire, a storm of lead that chewed through sandbags and HESCO barriers like paper. The defenders there broke. Mara saw them fall back, saw the gap open, saw enemy fighters flood through. Renner was screaming orders, trying to organize a counterattack, but there weren't enough bodies, weren't enough guns. The base was falling, and then she heard it, distant at first, then growing louder, a sound that didn't belong to rifles or explosions or dying men. Rotors. "All positions TOC, we've got air support inbound, 60 seconds. The Apache came in low and fast, running lights dark, a predator in the night. Its chin-mounted gun swiveled, tracking, and then it opened fire. The 30mm cannon was apocalyptic, each round the size of a beer bottle, each impact like a small bomb. The enemy fighters caught in the open simply ceased to exist, turned into red mist and scattered equipment. The Apache circled, firing, the pilot and gunner working in perfect sync. Hellfire missiles streaked out, impacting enemy positions in flowers of flame. The machine gun nests that had been tearing apart the northwest wall went silent, crews dead or scattered. The pressure lifted. The enemy assault stalled, then collapsed, fighters breaking and running for the valley, for cover, for anywhere that wasn't under the Apache's gun. Mara sagged against the cargo container, breathing hard, tasting blood and cordite. Around her, the base fell into an exhausted quiet broken only by the Apache's rotors and the moans of the wounded. They'd held. Barely, but they'd held. Hayes slid down beside her, his rifle across his knees, his face gray with fatigue. That was too close. Yeah. You think they'll come back? Mara looked toward the valley, where the Apache was making another gun run, pursuing the fleeing enemy. Not tonight. Maybe not at all. We bloodied them pretty bad. Because of you. Hayes turned to look at her. You saved the aid station, probably saved Vale. We saved the aid station. Don't do that, don't minimize it. He stood, wincing, favoring his left leg. You're a badass, Kincaid. Own it. He limped away toward the casualty collection point, leaving Mara alone with her thoughts and her rifle and the slowly dawning realization that she'd just fought off an assault by a numerically superior force, and survived. She was still sitting there, trying to process, when Renner found her. He looked worse than she felt. Uniform torn, left arm wrapped in a hasty bandage, his face streaked with soot and something darker. But his eyes were clear. Casualty report just came in, he said. 8 wounded, 2 critical, 0 KIA. Mara's throat tightened. 0. No one had died, despite the odds, despite everything. Vale, she asked. Stable. Medics got him through the worst of it before the attack started. He's going to need surgery, real surgery, but he'll make it. Renner crouched down beside her. We're evasing him to Bagram in the morning. First bird out. Good. Renner was quiet for a moment. Then, Intel says the enemy lost at least 40 fighters, maybe more. That's half their force. They're not coming back, not for a long time. So it's over. Yeah, it's over. He looked at her with something that might have been awe. You know what you did tonight, Kincaid? You turned yourself into a legend, the sniper who saved the commander, who stood her ground against 100 fighters. They're going to tell stories about you. Mara shook her head. I don't want stories. Too bad. You don't get to choose. He stood, extending his good hand. Come on. Let's get you checked out. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her body was a collection of aches and pains, bruised ribs from the explosion, a gash on her forehead that needed stitches, hands raw from gripping her rifle. But she was whole, functional, alive. The aid station was controlled chaos when they entered. Medics working on the wounded, calling for supplies, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this too many times. Mara found a corner and let a young corpsman clean and stitch her forehead while she watched the organized madness. She was almost done when one of the medics called out, "He's waking up!" Everyone turned. Mara stood, ignoring the corpsman's protests, and moved toward the table where Vale lay. His eyes were open, unfocused, confused, but open. The lead medic leaned over him. Commander Vale, can you hear me? Vale's lips moved. No sound at first. Then, barely a whisper. You're at Razor Point, sir. You're safe. Your team got you out. Vale's eyes tracked around the room, taking in the damage, the wounded, the evidence of battle. His gaze found Mara standing in the back, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. The sniper, he managed. Everyone looked at Mara. She felt her face heat, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but here, being stared at, being seen. But Vale was still looking at her, his eyes locked on hers, and she couldn't look away. Thank you, he said. Clear this time, certain. Mara nodded once, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. Then Vale's eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling him back under, and the medics went back to work. Renner touched her shoulder. "Get some sleep, Kincaid. That's an order." She didn't argue. Just walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, found her way to the barracks, and collapsed onto her bunk without bothering to remove her gear. Sleep came fast and dreamless. She woke to daylight and the sound of helicopter rotors. For a moment, disoriented, she thought they were under attack again. Then memory caught up. The evac bird. Vale's transport to Bagram. She made her way outside, moving through a base that looked like it had been through a war. Because it had. Blast craters, burned vehicles, collapsed structures. Work crews were already clearing rubble, stringing new wire, patching holes. Life went on. The Chinook was on the pad, rotors turning, crew chiefs loading stretchers. Mara watched from a distance as they carried Vale aboard, still unconscious, still pale, but alive. The medics followed, carrying their equipment, their exhaustion evident in every movement. Hayes was there too, along with most of Alpha Team, seeing their commander off, making sure he got home. Renner saw Mara and waved her over. She joined the group reluctantly, uncomfortable with the attention. "We're going with him," Hayes said. "Whole team. Major's releasing us for escort duty." "Good," Mara said. "You should come too." She blinked. "What?" "You're the reason he's alive. You should be there when he wakes up. Really wakes up." Mara shook her head. "I've got a job here. Overwatch doesn't have a functioning position anymore," Renner interrupted. "Your tower's destroyed, your rifle's buried under half a ton of rubble, and you've been awake for 36 hours straight." He crossed his arms. "You're going to Bagram. That's not a request." She wanted to argue, wanted to protest, but looking at their faces, at the respect there, the genuine desire to include her, she found she couldn't. "Okay," she said quietly. 20 minutes later, she was on the Chinook, strapped into a seat across from Vale's stretcher, watching Razor Point shrink below them as the helicopter climbed. The valley spread out beneath them, beautiful and deadly and indifferent. Somewhere down there, buried in rubble, was her rifle, her position. The place she'd stood and fought and proven something she hadn't known needed proving. But looking at Vale's still form, at the slow rise and fall of his chest, at the IV bags and monitors keeping him tethered to life, she thought maybe it had been worth it. All of it. The flight to Bagram took 90 minutes. Mara spent most of it staring out the open door, watching Afghanistan scroll past below. Mountains and deserts and tiny villages that looked peaceful from altitude. Hayes sat beside her, quiet for once, lost in his own thoughts. They were 20 minutes out when Vale's hand moved. Just a twitch at first. Then his fingers curled, released. Curled again. The medic monitoring him leaned in, checking vitals, and Vale's eyes opened. This time, they were clear, focused. He looked around the helicopter's interior, taking in the faces watching him, and his expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "We're flying," he said. His voice was rough, damaged, but stronger than before. "Yes, sir," the medic said. "Taking you to Bagram. You're going to be fine." Vale's eyes found Mara again, held her gaze. "You were there," he said. "In the valley. I heard your voice on the radio." Mara nodded. "And when they came for me, you were there too." "She guided us in, sir," Hayes said. "Got us through the whole thing, and then held off an entire assault force while you were in surgery." Vale's expression shifted, something like disbelief, then respect. "What's your name?" he asked Mara. "Kincaid, sir. Sergeant Mara Kincaid." "Well, Sergeant Kincaid," Vale managed a weak smile. "Looks like I owe you my life." Before Mara could respond, before she could deflect or minimize or do any of the things she normally did when faced with gratitude, the helicopter lurched violently. Alarms screamed, red lights flashed, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom, tight with controlled panic. "Brace for impact, we're hit, we're going down." The world became sound and chaos, metal shrieking, hydraulics screaming, the Chinook's twin rotors chopping air in a rhythm that was suddenly terribly wrong. Mara's hands flew to the nearest handhold as the helicopter pitched forward, nose dropping, altitude bleeding away in seconds that felt like hours. "We're losing hydraulics," the pilot shouted. "Hydraulic failure, both systems." Another lurch. The Chinook rolled left, hard enough that loose equipment slid across the deck. One of the medics grabbed Vale's stretcher, lashing it down with cargo straps while the other fought to keep IV bags from tearing free. Hayes was shouting something, but the noise swallowed his words. Mara looked out the open door and saw the ground rushing up. Not the smooth approach of a controlled landing, but the sick, spinning descent of something falling out of the sky. 30 seconds, the pilot's voice was ice over panic. Crash positions now! Mara pulled her knees up, arms wrapped tight, head down. The training was automatic. Protect your spine, protect your head. Survive the impact and worry about everything else after. The Chinook hit hard. Not the catastrophic slam she'd expected, but a bone-jarring impact that threw her against the bulkhead despite the harness. Metal screamed. Something exploded in the rear. Not ordnance, probably a fuel line. The helicopter skidded, rotors still turning, chewing into earth, throwing up a wall of dust and debris that turned the world brown. Then stillness. Mara's ears rang, her vision swam. She tasted blood, but she was alive and conscious, and that meant she had work to do. "Everyone out!" Renner's voice, commanding even through the haze. "Move, move, move!" Her hands fumbled with the harness release, got it open. She stumbled to her feet, legs shaky, and helped the medic nearest her unbuckle and grab his aid bag. Around them, Alpha Team was already moving, checking each other, grabbing weapons, preparing for whatever came next. "Vale!" Hayes was at the stretcher, working the cargo straps loose. "Help me get him." Mara moved. Together they lifted the stretcher, awkward and ungainly, but functional. Vale was conscious, eyes wide, trying to help, but his damaged body wasn't cooperating. They carried him toward the door, down the ramp that was half buried in churned earth. Outside, the world was dust and damaged landscape. The Chinook had plowed a furrow 50 meters long before coming to rest in a dry riverbed. One rotor was sheared completely off. The other hung at a drunken angle, bent and useless. Smoke poured from the engine housings. "Perimeter!" Renner was directing people, building security even before checking injuries. 360 coverage, weapons out. If we got shot down, they're coming to finish the job. The crew chiefs were already out, weapons up, scanning the surrounding terrain. It was broken country, gullies and ridges and scattered rocks that provided 1,000 hiding places. Good defensive terrain if you knew how to use it. Terrible if the enemy got here first. Mara helped carry Vale to a slight depression behind an outcropping, the stretcher settling into dirt that had probably been dry for months. The medic swarmed him immediately, checking vitals, adjusting IVs. "I need a sit rep," Renner called out. "2 injured from the crash," someone reported. 1 broken arm, 1 possible concussion, everyone else mobile. "Radio?" The crew chief shook his head. "Birds' radios are fried. Personal sets aren't getting signal through these ridges." "Sat phone?" "Trying now." Mara moved to the perimeter, finding a position behind a boulder that gave her a good view of the high ground to the east. Her M4 was still with her. She'd kept it through the crash, muscle memory refusing to let go even during impact. She checked the chamber, verified the magazine, and settled into a firing position. Hayes dropped down beside her, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. "Think it was mechanical failure?" he asked quietly. "No?" "Yeah, me neither." They'd been shot down. The question was by who and whether they were still out there. The sat phone chirped, a good sound, a sign of connection. The crew chief was speaking rapidly, giving coordinates, status, requesting immediate QRF and air support. But Mara knew the math. They were 70 clicks from Bagram, maybe 30 from Razor Point. Help would come, but it would take time. Time they might not have. "Contact!" One of the team members on the south perimeter. "Movement, 200 meters, ridgeline." Every weapon swung that direction. Mara shifted, bringing her rifle around, scanning through the ACOG. At first nothing, then, there. A figure moving between rocks, then another, not trying to hide, not yet. They were being sized up. "Hold fire," Renner said quietly. "Let's see what they do." What they did was spread out. Mara counted 8 visible fighters, but there would be more, always more. They moved with purpose, taking positions that would give them overlapping fields of fire on the crash site. Professional. Again. "QRF is inbound," the crew chief reported. "ETA 45 minutes, air support 20. 20 minutes. That was the number that mattered. If they could hold for 20 minutes, Apache gunships would arrive and turn the area into a graveyard. If they couldn't— RPG! Someone screamed. Mara saw it streak out from the ridgeline, a trail of smoke connecting the launcher to the point where the rocket would impact. She tracked it with her eyes, watched it arc toward the downed Chinook, and then the world erupted in flame. The helicopter's fuel tanks went up in a fireball that turned the sky orange and sent a mushroom of black smoke climbing into the afternoon air. Heat washed over the perimeter in a wave that made exposed skin tighten. Their ride home was gone. Now they were just survivors in the dirt, waiting for rescue or death, whichever came first. "Return fire!" Renner's voice cut through the shock. "Suppress those positions!" The team opened up, M4S barking in controlled bursts. The two crew chiefs had M240 machine guns and they cut loose, pouring rounds into the ridgeline, forcing the enemy to duck, to take cover, buying seconds and meters. Mara found the RPG gunner reloading behind a boulder. Exhaled. Fired. The figure jerked and fell, but more were coming. She could see them now, emerging from the gullies and dead ground, at least 20 fighters moving in a coordinated assault. They'd waited for the helicopter to burn. Waited to make sure no one was flying out of here. Now they were coming to finish it. The fight settled into a brutal rhythm. The defenders fired, moved, fired again, conserving ammunition but not at the expense of accuracy. Every round had to count. Every magazine had to last. Mara burned through one mag, then another. Her shots were deliberate, patient, finding targets that exposed themselves for just a second too long. A fighter trying to move between cover. Another setting up a machine gun. A third coordinating on a radio. Leaders first. Weapons crews second. The math of survival. Beside her, Hayes was firing in short, controlled bursts. "They're trying to flank south. I see them." Mara shifted her aim, caught two fighters trying to use a dry wash to get closer. Put rounds into the wash, forcing them back. One went down, the other retreated. But the enemy was learning, adapting. They stopped trying to rush and instead began a methodical suppression, pouring fire into the defensive positions, pinning down the defenders, making movement dangerous. Mara felt a round snap past her head, felt another impact the boulder inches from her shoulder, spraying her with rock chips. She pressed tighter into cover, making herself small, and kept firing. "Ammo check," Renners called out. The responses came back in numbers that were all too small. 3 mags. 4. 2. Everyone was running low. The crew chief's machine guns were down to their last belts. "Air support! How long?" Hayes shouted. The crew chief checked his watch, his face grim. 12 minutes. 12 minutes. It felt like forever. A grenade arced through the air and landed in the middle of the perimeter. Mara saw it, registered what it was, opened her mouth to shout. Vale's medic dove on it, not to throw it back, not to kick it away. He covered it with his body, curling around the explosive, and for one frozen instant everyone saw what was about to happen. The grenade went off muffled, but still devastating. The medic's body absorbed most of the blast, but shrapnel still flew, tearing through gear and flesh. Someone screamed. Someone else was shouting for medical supplies that weren't there. The medic didn't move, didn't make a sound. Hayes crawled to him, checked for a pulse, and his face told Mara everything she needed to know. Their first KIA. The enemy sensed weakness, smelled blood. They pushed harder, closing the range, their fire becoming more accurate. Another grenade landed, this one further away, but the message was clear. They were trying to break the defense through shock and sustained violence. It was working. "We can't hold," one of the crew chiefs shouted. "We need to fall back." "Fall back where?" Renner's voice was hard. "We're in the middle of nowhere with a wounded commander who can't walk. We hold here or we die here. Those are the options." Mara dropped her empty magazine, reached for another, and found nothing. She was out. Her rifle was a useless club. She drew her sidearm, the old Beretta with maybe 15 rounds left, and kept fighting. A fighter emerged from behind cover, running toward them, AK firing from the hip. Mara put 2 rounds center mass. He went down, but another took his place. She fired again, missed, adjusted, fired, hit. The slide locked back, empty. She had 1 magazine left. Around her, the fight was collapsing. Two more team members were hit, one in the leg, one in the shoulder, both still fighting but degraded. The machine guns went silent, their ammo exhausted. Rifles clicked on empty chambers. They were done. The enemy knew it too. Their fire slackened. They were taking their time now. No rush, just a slow, methodical advance that would end with everyone dead or captured. Mara looked at Hayes, saw the same calculation in his eyes, saw him checking his own ammunition, saw him glance at the grenade on his vest. Last resort. Take as many with you as possible. She was reaching for her own grenade when she heard it, faint at first, then growing, a sound that didn't belong to rifles or explosions, rotors, not the heavy thump of a Chinook, something sharper, faster, Apache. The enemy heard it too. Their advance faltered, stopped. Someone shouted in a language Mara didn't understand, and fighters started falling back, running, trying to get to cover before... The Apache came over the ridge like an avenging angel, nose low, gun already tracking. The 30mm cannon opened up and the world became fire and thunder. Rounds chewed through rock and flesh with equal indifference. A machine gun position simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater and scattered equipment. The helicopter circled, hunting, its sensors painting every living thing with invisible light. Hellfire missiles streaked out, impacting distant targets, vehicles maybe, or reinforcements that never got the chance to join the fight. The enemy broke completely. Those who could run did. Those who couldn't died where they lay. In under 2 minutes, the Apache had turned a desperate last stand into a slaughter. The cannon fell silent. The helicopter circled once more, its crew scanning for additional threats, then banked away to clear the approach for the cavalry. 2 more Chinooks appeared, big and ungainly and beautiful. One landed in a storm of dust while the other orbited, door gunners watching the perimeter. The QRF poured out, fresh troops with full ammunition and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from knowing they'd already won. Mara sat down hard, her back against the boulder, and felt everything catch up to her at once. The adrenaline crash, the exhaustion, the realization that they'd been seconds from dying and were now, improbably, safe. Hayes was beside her, laughing. Actually laughing. The sound was slightly manic, the kind of laughter that lived right next to tears. "We're alive," he said. "We're actually alive." "Yeah." Mara's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Yeah, we are." The QRF's medics reached them, professional and efficient. They went to Vale first, checking him, stabilizing him, preparing him for transport. Then they moved to the wounded, the crew chief with the broken arm, the 2 hit during the fight, everyone who'd taken damage. One of them tried to check Mara. She waved him off. "I'm fine." "Ma'am, you're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." He moved on, knowing better than to argue with someone still holding a weapon. Renner appeared, looking older than he had an hour ago. His left arm was wrapped in a fresh bandage, blood seeping through. But he was upright, functional. "Casualty count," he said quietly. 1 KIA, 5 wounded, 2 serious. Everyone else walking. He looked at Mara. "You're out of ammo." "Yes, sir." "You stayed in the fight, anyway." "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly, something like respect in his eyes. "You're stubborn, Kincaid, I'll give you that." They loaded Vale onto the first Chinook along with the most seriously wounded. The medic's body went on too, wrapped in a poncho liner, handled with the reverence reserved for those who'd made the ultimate sacrifice. Mara climbed aboard the second bird with the rest of Alpha Team. Found a seat, buckled in, watched Afghanistan fall away below them as the helicopter climbed. This time, nothing shot at them. The flight to Bagram was silent. No one had the energy for conversation. They just sat with their thoughts and their grief and their gratitude for still being alive. Mara stared out the door, watching the landscape scroll past, and tried not to think about how close it had been. How many times in the last 48 hours she'd almost died. How many people had died because she'd spotted one heat signature in a valley and refused to let it go. Was it worth it? She looked across the cabin at Vale's stretcher on the other bird, visible through the Chinook's open rear, and thought maybe it was. One life saved, several others lost or damaged. The math was ugly, but war always was. Bagram appeared on the horizon, a sprawling complex of runways and hangars and living quarters, A piece of America transplanted into Central Asia. The Chinooks descended in formation, landing on the main medical pad where ambulances were already waiting. The controlled chaos of a mass casualty event unfolded with practiced efficiency. Vale was off first, surrounded by a trauma team that moved him toward the hospital at a run. The other wounded followed. The dead were handled separately, with more care, their journey ending in a different building. Mara climbed out of the helicopter into harsh sunlight and found herself in a world that felt surreal after the last 2 days. Clean uniforms, paved roads, buildings with air conditioning. It was like stepping from one reality into another. A colonel she didn't recognize was waiting, flanked by 2 captains and what looked like a public affairs officer. "Captain Renner," the colonel asked. "Yes, sir." "I need a full debrief. All of you. Conference room, 30 minutes. "Sir, my men need rest. Medical attention, your men will get it after the debrief." The colonel's tone left no room for argument. "This situation has attracted attention at levels well above my pay grade. I need to know exactly what happened, and I need to know now." Renner's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." The colonel's eyes swept the group, landing on Mara. "You're the sniper, Kincaid." "Yes, sir." "You're particularly requested. Don't go anywhere." He walked away, captains trailing in his wake. Mara looked at Renner. "Requested by who?" "Above his pay grade, apparently." Renner's expression was unreadable. "Which means very above ours." The 30 minutes passed in a blur. Quick showers, clean uniforms that felt wrong after days in the dirt, food that tasted like cardboard because her body was too tired to process taste. Then the conference room, sterile, air-conditioned, filled with people in clean uniforms who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. The debrief was exhaustive. They went through everything: the initial mission, Vale's fall, the overnight vigil, the rescue, the assault on Razor Point, the shoot-down, the second fight. Every detail examined, every decision questioned. Mara answered when spoken to, kept her responses factual, and tried not to let her exhaustion show. It was during the 3rd hour, when they were going over the helicopter incident for the 2nd time, that the door opened and 2 men in civilian clothes entered. Intelligence. Had to be. They had that look, alert eyes, comfortable silence, the kind of presence that made soldiers nervous. The colonel stood. "Gentlemen, we weren't expecting—" "Apologies for the interruption, Colonel." The older of the 2 men had gray hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing. "We need to borrow Sergeant Kincaid." Every eye in the room turned to Mara. She felt her pulse quicken. "On whose authority?" the colonel asked. The man produced credentials. Mara couldn't see them from across the room, but the colonel's expression shifted. Surprise, then wariness. "Of course." He looked at Mara. "Sergeant, you're excused." She stood, legs stiff from sitting, and followed the 2 men out of the conference room. They didn't speak until they were in a different building, in a small office with no windows and a lock on the door. The older man gestured to a chair. Mara sat. "I'm going to be direct, Sergeant Kincaid," he said. "The operation that Commander Vale was leading when he went down. What do you know about it?" "Just what was in the briefing. Taliban leadership meeting, high-value target." "Did the briefing mention who the target was?" "No, sir." The 2 men exchanged glances. The younger one opened a laptop, turned it to face Mara, and showed her a photograph. Middle-aged man, dark beard, hard eyes, wearing a mix of traditional Afghan clothing and modern tactical gear. "This is Khalid Ahmadzai," the older man said, "former Afghan army officer, defected to the Taliban in 2021. Since then, he's been responsible for at least 15 attacks on coalition forces." He paused. "He's also the one who planned the ambush that almost killed Commander Vale." Mara studied the photograph, committed the face to memory. "The shoot-down," she said quietly. "That was him too." "We believe so. His signature is all over both operations. The precision, the coordination, the refusal to give up even after heavy losses." The man closed the laptop. "He's made this personal. He wants Vale dead. And he wants everyone who saved Vale dead too. Starting with me. Starting with you." The man leaned back. "We have intel that suggests Ahmadzai has put significant resources into hunting you specifically. He sees you as an embarrassment, a female American sniper who outsmarted him. He can't let that stand. Mara felt cold despite the room's warmth. So what do you want from me? Your help catching him. The younger man spoke for the first time. You're already bait whether you like it or not. We're just asking if you're willing to be bait deliberately, with support, with a plan. She looked between them. A trap. A trap, the older man confirmed. We leak information that you're being transferred somewhere vulnerable, set up an ambush. When Ahmadzai comes for you, and he will, we take him. And if something goes wrong, then you'll be in a very dangerous position with very dangerous people. He met her eyes. I won't lie to you, Sergeant. This is high risk, but it's also the best chance we've had to eliminate Ahmadzai in 18 months. Your call. Mara thought about the medic who'd thrown himself on a grenade, about the fighters who'd keep coming until they were all dead, about Vale lying in a hospital bed because one man had decided American lives were worth less than his pride. I'll do it, she said. The older man smiled, thin and cold. Good. We start tomorrow. They briefed her for another hour, details of the operation, contingencies, extraction plans. By the time she left the office, the sun was setting and her head was spinning with information. She found her way to the hospital, to the ICU where Vale had been taken. Renner was there, sitting in the hallway, head back against the wall, eyes closed. He opened them when she approached. They won't let me in, he said. Surgery. Again. Mara sat down beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Intelligence wants to use me as bait, she said finally, to catch the guy who's been targeting us. Renner looked at her. And you said yes. Yeah. You're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. He almost smiled. Yeah. Maybe both. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're on our side. Me too. They sat in silence until a doctor emerged, tired but smiling, and told them Vale was stable, the surgery successful, prognosis good. One small victory in a war full of losses. Mara left Renner there and found her way to temporary quarters, a small room with a bed and a locker and nothing else. She stripped off her gear, lay down, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow, about being bait, about the man who wanted her dead and the trap being built around them both. Somewhere in Bagram, intelligence officers were finalizing plans. Somewhere in Afghanistan, Ahmadzai was planning his next move. And somewhere between those 2 points, there would be blood and fire and a reckoning that had been building since the moment Mara had refused to look away from a heat signature in a valley. She rolled over, closed her eyes, and waited for morning. It came too fast. The briefing room at 0600 was cold and fluorescent bright, filled with people Mara had never seen before. Delta operators with quiet eyes and scarred hands, intelligence analysts clutching tablets, the Air Force combat controller who'd coordinate air support, and at the head of the table, the gray-haired man from yesterday whose name she'd learned was Wagner. The operation is simple, Wagner said, pulling up a map on the screen. We leak that Sergeant Kincaid is being transferred to a smaller outpost, Firebase Dagger, 40 clicks northeast of here. Skeleton crew, minimal defenses, perfect target. Except it won't be Skeleton, the Delta team leader said. His name tape read Masters. My team will be in position 24 hours prior. Overwatch on the high ground, QRF standing by. When Ahmadzai makes his move, we collapse the net. Mara studied the map. Firebase Dagger sat in a valley bowl, surrounded by ridges that provided excellent cover for an attacking force. But those same ridges could hide defenders. It was a double-edged sword. What makes you think he'll take the bait? She asked. Wagner smiled without warmth. Because we're going to make it irresistible. Intel will leak that you're traveling light, just a small security detail, no air cover. He won't be able to resist. And if he sends someone else instead of coming himself? He won't. This is personal for him. You embarrassed him twice. He'll want to finish it himself. The briefing continued for another hour. Routes, timelines, contingencies. By the end, Mara had memorized every detail, every fallback position, every extraction point. Questions? Wagner asked. She had 100, but only one that mattered. When do we leave? Noon. Convoy departs from the main gate. He looked around the room. Everyone knows their role. Let's make this count. The room emptied. Mara stayed behind, staring at the map, memorizing terrain features. You don't have to do this. She turned. Hayes stood in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept. Probably hadn't. Yeah, I do. No, you don't. You've done enough. More than enough. Let someone else be the hero for once. Mara shook her head. This isn't about being a hero. It's about finishing what we started. What if it goes wrong? Then it goes wrong. She met his eyes. But at least it'll be over. Hayes crossed the room, stopped a few feet away. Vale's awake, really awake this time. He asked to see you. When? Now, if you've got time before the convoy. She had time. She followed Hayes through Bagram's maze of corridors to the ICU, where Vale lay propped up in bed, pale but alert. His left leg was in a complex brace, suspended slightly. IV lines snaked from both arms, but his eyes were clear. He smiled when he saw her. The famous Sergeant Kincaid. Sir. She felt suddenly awkward, uncertain. This man was a commander, a legend in the community, and she was just, sit. He gestured to a chair. Please. She sat. Hayes lingered in the doorway, but Vale waved him off. Give us a minute, Hayes. The door clicked shut. Vale studied her for a long moment. They tell me you're the reason I'm alive, that you spotted me when everyone else had given up. I was just doing my job, sir. No. His voice was firm. You were doing more than that. You were refusing to accept an outcome everyone else had already accepted. He paused. That takes something most people don't have. Mara didn't know what to say to that. They also tell me you're about to do something incredibly dangerous, Vale continued, going after Ahmadzai. Yes, sir. Good. He shifted slightly, wincing. That man needs to answer for what he's done. But Kincaid, he waited until she met his eyes. Make sure you come back. The military needs more people like you, people who don't give up, who don't look away. I'll do my best, sir. I know you will. He extended his hand. She took it, felt the strength still there despite everything. Thank you, for my life, for my kids getting to have a father, for everything. Her throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and left before the emotion could overwhelm her. The convoy rolled out at noon exactly, 3 up-armored Humvees and a supply truck, moving at a steady pace through Bagram's gates. Mara rode in the middle vehicle, watching Afghanistan slide past through the window. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh way. Mountains that looked carved from stone, valleys dotted with mud brick compounds. Everywhere, the evidence of decades of war, burned-out Soviet tanks, impact craters, bullet-scarred walls. Contact right, the gunner's voice was sharp. Vehicle approaching fast. Mara's hand went to her rifle. Through the window, she saw a pickup truck racing toward them from a side road, bed filled with armed men. The convoy's lead vehicle swung its gun around. Warning shots! The 50 cal barked, kicking up dirt in front of the approaching truck. It swerved, slowed, and the armed men raised their hands. Not an attack, just locals who'd gotten too close. The convoy kept moving. False alarm, the driver muttered. Probably. But Mara's pulse was racing. Every vehicle was a potential threat. Every compound a possible ambush site. This was how people died. Not in dramatic firefights, but in sudden, random violence that came from nowhere. They reached Firebase Dagger as the sun was setting. It was smaller than Razor Point, maybe a dozen buildings, a single guard tower, HESCO barriers forming a rough square. The small garrison welcomed them with the wary politeness of people who knew something was wrong but hadn't been told what. You're the sniper, the Firebase commander said. Captain someone. Mara hadn't caught his name. The one who pulled Vale out. Yes, sir. Word is you're here because this place is safer than Bagram. He looked skeptical. That true? No, sir. He blinked. Want to elaborate? Not really, sir. He studied her, then nodded slowly. All right. Well, you're in the southeast corner, guard tower, best sightlines on the base. Thank you, sir. She found her position as darkness fell. The tower was crude. Wooden platform, sandbag walls, a corrugated metal roof that wouldn't stop a strong wind, much less a bullet. But the view was excellent. She could see the valley approaches, the ridge lines, the dead ground, where attackers would mass. She set up the Barrett. They'd found her a replacement at Bagram, new but functional, and began her watch. Delta team was out there somewhere, invisible, waiting. The QRF was staged 10 minutes away. Air support was on standby. The trap was set. Now they just needed the rat to show up. The first night passed quietly. Mara watched shadows shift, heard distant sounds that could have been gunfire or generators or her imagination. Dawn came gray and cold. The second night was the same. No movement, no contact. "Maybe he's not coming," Hayes said. He'd been assigned to the fire base as part of her security detail. "He's coming." Mara kept her eye on the scope. "He's just being careful." Or he smelled the trap. Maybe. But on the third night, at 02:43 hours, her radio crackled. "Overwatch Delta 1, we have movement. Multiple signatures. North Ridge. Estimate 30-plus individuals." Mara's pulse jumped. "Positive ID?" "Negative. But they're armed, and they're moving toward the firebase." She scanned the North Ridge through her thermal optic. At first, nothing. Then, there. Heat signatures, human-shaped, moving in tactical formation, professional, controlled. "I have eyes on," she confirmed. "They're staging for an assault." "Delta 1 copies. We're moving to intercept positions. Hold fire until we give the word." The next 20 minutes were agony, watching the enemy mass, watching them organize, watching them prepare to attack, and being unable to do anything about it. Then Wagner's voice cut through the radio chatter, calm and cold. "All units stand by. We've confirmed Ahmadzai is on site. I repeat, primary target is present. Wait for my command." Mara's hands tightened on her rifle. He was here. The man who'd nearly killed Vale, who'd shot down their helicopter, who'd made all of this personal. He was here, and he was walking into a trap. The attack came at 0300, mortars first, walking rounds across the firebase, probing defenses. The small garrison returned fire, their confusion evident in the disorganized response. They hadn't been told this was staged, hadn't been told to hold back. Enemy fighters poured down from the ridgeline, exactly as predicted. "All Delta elements, execute," Wagner's voice. The night exploded. Delta operators rose from concealed positions, their night vision giving them overwhelming advantage. Precision fire from multiple angles cut into the attacking force. Fighters fell, died, scattered. The assault broke apart within seconds. But a smaller group split off, moving with purpose toward the southeast corner, toward Mara's tower. She saw them coming, counted 8 men, one in the lead, taller than the others, moving with authority. Ahmadzai. He was coming for her specifically. "Overwatch, Delta 1. We see the flanking element. Hold position. We're moving to intercept." But they were too far. The math was simple. Delta would arrive in 90 seconds. Ahmadzai and his team would reach the tower in 40. She keyed her radio. "Negative, Delta 1. I've got this." "Overwatch, do not engage alone." She switched the radio off, brought the Barrett up, found Ahmadzai in her scope. He was looking directly at her tower, smiling. He knew she was there, knew this was a trap, and he was coming anyway because his pride demanded it. Mara put the crosshairs on his chest, held her breath, started to squeeze. Ahmadzai dropped behind cover. His team scattered, using the terrain, making themselves hard targets. And then they started firing, concentrated bursts at the tower, forcing Mara down. Wood splintered, sandbags burst. A round cracked past her head so close she felt the heat. She couldn't stay here. Mara grabbed her M4, left the Barrett, and dropped through the tower's trapdoor. Hit the ground running. Behind her, the tower shuddered under sustained fire. "She's moving!" someone shouted in Pashto. "Cut her off!" Mara ran toward the firebase's center, using buildings for cover. Rounds chased her, kicking up dirt, punching through plywood. She returned fireblind, just trying to make them keep their heads down. 2 fighters appeared from between buildings. She shot the first, dove as the second fired, rolled, and came up shooting. He went down clutching his leg. "Kincaid!" Hayes was there, rifle up, covering her retreat. Fall back to the TOC. They moved together, leapfrogging, one firing while the other moved. Professional. The way they'd trained. The way they'd survived. The TOC was a reinforced bunker, concrete and sandbags built to take mortar fire. They reached it just as Ahmedzai's team closed in. Inside! Hayes shoved her through the door, turned to fire, took 3 rounds in the chest. His body armor caught them, but the impact threw him backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping. Mara grabbed his vest, hauled him inside, slammed the steel door shut. Bullets pinged off metal. You okay? She was checking him for blood. Can't breathe. Broken ribs, probably. Maybe worse, but alive. She moved to the firing port, rifle up. Through the narrow slit, she could see Ahmedzai's team regrouping, taking positions around the bunker. They had her trapped. Overwatch, Delta 1? What's your status? She keyed her radio. Pinned in the TOC. Hayes is hit. Need support. We're 30 seconds out. Hold tight. 30 seconds. She could do 30 seconds. A grenade clattered against the door. Mara's eyes went wide. The explosion was massive, deafening, the steel door buckling inward but holding. Smoke filled the bunker. Her ears rang. Hayes was coughing, trying to sit up. Another grenade. This one came through the firing port. Mara saw it land, saw the pin was pulled, had maybe 2 seconds. She grabbed it, stood, threw it back through the port with everything she had. The explosion outside was followed by screaming. Then silence. She risked a look through the port, 2 bodies on the ground, the rest of Ahmedzai's team taking cover. You're insane, Hayes croaked. Probably. The door shuddered under impact, someone trying to breach it with something heavy. Mara braced against it, knowing she couldn't hold forever. Delta 1, I need you now. 10 seconds. The door buckled further. One more hit and it would give way. And then gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The battering stopped. Through the firing port, Mara saw Delta operators moving in, professional and lethal. Ahmedzai's team tried to return fire, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, caught in a crossfire they couldn't escape. One by one, they went down. All except Ahmedzai. He broke cover, sprinting toward the perimeter, firing as he ran. Delta rounds chased him, but he was fast, using the darkness, using every scrap of cover. Mara watched him through the port, watched him reach the wire, watched him start to climb. He was going to get away. She couldn't let that happen. Mara grabbed Hayes' rifle, hers was empty, and ran outside. Delta operators shouted at her, but she ignored them. She had one shot at this. Ahmedzai was over the wire now, running toward the ridgeline. Mara dropped to one knee, brought the rifle up, found him in the ACOG. Running target, at least 200 meters, moving fast. The shot was near impossible. She exhaled, led him, accounted for his speed, fired. Ahmedzai stumbled, fell, got back up, limping now. She fired again. He went down and didn't get up. Delta operators were already moving, securing the perimeter, checking bodies. Masters appeared beside her. That was a hell of a shot, he said. Is he dead? Let's find out. They found Ahmedzai at the wire's base, bleeding from 2 wounds, shoulder and leg. Not fatal. Not immediately. He looked up at Mara as she approached, his face twisted with pain and rage. You, he spat. American woman. You think you've won? Mara knelt beside him, close enough to see the hatred in his eyes, close enough to make sure he heard every word. I have won. Your men are dead or captured. Your operation is finished, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell, knowing you were beaten by the person you underestimated most. His face contorted. I should have killed you when... But you didn't. Her voice was cold, final. Because you were too arrogant, too proud. You thought I was just a woman, just a sniper, not worth your full attention. She stood. That was your mistake. Medics moved in, working on Ahmedzai with professional detachment. He'd lived long enough to face justice. That was enough. Masters appeared at her shoulder. Vale's going to want to hear about this. Vale can read the report. I think he'll want to hear it from you. The sun was rising by the time they secured Firebase Dagger. The Firebase commander was getting a rapid education in what his small outpost had just been used for. Wagner was coordinating with higher headquarters. and Mara was sitting on a HESCO barrier, watching the medics work, feeling the adrenaline finally drain away. Hayes limped over, his chest wrapped in bandages. "You saved my life. You saved mine first. So we're even?" "Yeah, we're even." He sat beside her, both of them looking out at the valley as it filled with morning light. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know." And she didn't. His mission was over. Ahmed's eye was captured. Vale was recovering. The threat was neutralized. What did happen now? The answer came 3 days later, at Bagram, in a ceremony Mara had tried very hard to avoid. But they'd made it mandatory. The parade ground was filled with personnel, soldiers in dress uniforms, officers in their finest, even some civilians from the embassy. A stage had been erected, decorated with flags and unit colors. Mara stood at attention in the front row, uncomfortable in her own dress uniform, wishing she was anywhere else. Vale was there too, in a wheelchair but present, his eyes clear and proud. Beside him sat Hayes and the rest of Alpha Team, and behind them dozens of other personnel whose lives had intersected with this story. A general whose name Mara barely registered stepped to the podium. "We're here today to recognize extraordinary courage," he began, "to honor those who, when faced with impossible odds, refused to accept defeat." The ceremony proceeded with military precision. Citations were read. Medals were presented. The medic who'd sacrificed himself on the grenade received a posthumous Silver Star, his family accepting via video link, their grief evident even through the screen. Hayes received a Bronze Star. So did several others from Alpha Team. And then the general called Mara's name. She marched forward, every eye tracking her movement, stood at attention before the general. "Sergeant Mara Kincaid," he read from the citation, "for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy. While serving as Overwatch sniper, Sergeant Kincaid maintained vigilance for over 11 hours, leading to the identification and rescue of a critically wounded commander. She subsequently provided precision fire that saved multiple lives during a coordinated enemy assault, and voluntarily served as bait in a successful operation to capture a high-value target. Her actions reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army." He pinned the Silver Star to her chest. The weight of it was surprisingly heavy. "The nation is grateful for your service, Sergeant." "Thank you, sir." She saluted. He returned it. She marched back to her position as applause rippled through the crowd. The ceremony continued, but Mara barely heard it. She was thinking about the valley, about the heat signature that had started everything, about the choice to keep watching when everyone else had looked away. Would she do it again, knowing the cost? Yes. 1,000 times yes. After the ceremony, there was a reception, coffee and cookies and awkward small talk. Mara tried to slip away, but Vale caught her. He was standing now, leaning heavily on a cane, but standing. "They're putting me in for a medical retirement," he said without preamble. "Leg's never going to be what it was. I won't pass the physical." "I'm sorry, sir." "Don't be. I'm alive because of you. I get to go home to my wife, get to watch my kids grow up. That's worth more than any career." He paused. "They're offering me a position. Training command. Developing the next generation of leaders." "That's good, sir." "It is, and I want you to help." Mara blinked. "Sir?" "I'm building a program, teaching young officers and NCOs about decision-making under pressure, about not giving up, about the kind of leadership that doesn't wait for permission." He met her eyes. "You embody all of that. I want you on my team." "Sir, I'm a sniper. I don't teach." "You teach every time you pull that trigger. Every time you make a decision that saves lives." Vale's voice was firm. "The military needs people like you in positions where you can shape others. Will you consider it?" She looked around the reception, at Hayes laughing with his team, at the other snipers who'd started treating her differently, with respect instead of skepticism, at all the people whose lives had been changed by one decision to keep watching. "I'll consider it, sir." "Good." He smiled. "That's all I ask." 2 weeks later, Mara stood in front of a classroom at Fort Benning. 20 junior snipers stared back at her, suspicious, skeptical, wondering what this female sergeant could possibly teach them. She recognized that look, had seen it in mirrors, had lived it. "My name is Sergeant Kincaid," she began. and I'm going to tell you about a time I watched everyone else give up, about what happened when I refused to do the same. She had their attention now. Good. It started with a heat signature in a valley. The story unfolded, not as a lecture, but as a lesson, about observation, about patience, about refusing to accept easy answers when lives were at stake, about seeing what others missed because they'd already decided what they wanted to see. By the end, several students were taking notes. Others sat with expressions of dawning understanding. One raised his hand. "Sergeant, what if you'd been wrong? What if it hadn't been Commander Vale?" Mara considered the question, remembered the weight of that decision, the risk of being wrong. "Then I would have been wrong," she said simply. "But I'd rather be wrong trying to save someone than right giving up on them." The class sat with that, absorbed it. After dismissal, as the students filed out, one hung back, a young woman, private first class, looking nervous. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How do you deal with people who don't think you belong? Who assume you can't do the job because you're female?" The private nodded. Mara thought about Razor Point, about being dismissed, overlooked, treated as an afterthought, about proving herself not through words but through action. "You let your work speak," she said. "You show up. You do the job. You don't ask for permission or validation. And when the moment comes, when everyone else is ready to quit, you're the one who stays. You're the one who refuses to look away." She met the private's eyes. "That's how you deal with it. You be so good they can't ignore you." The private straightened. "Yes, Sergeant." She left and Mara was alone in the classroom. She walked to the window, looking out at the training ranges where the next generation was learning to shoot, to think, to lead. Her phone buzzed. A text from Hayes. "Heard you're making cadre nervous. They didn't expect you to be this good at teaching. Keep it up." She smiled and pocketed the phone. 6 months ago, she'd been a lone sniper on a forgotten firebase, watching a valley that everyone else had written off. Now she was shaping the people who'd carry forward the lessons learned in Blood and Fire. The work was different. The stakes were different. But the mission was the same. Refuse to give up. Refuse to look away. Be the person who stays when everyone else leaves. That evening, she received an email. The subject line made her pause. From the Vale family, she opened it. "Sergeant Kincaid, my name is Emma. I'm 8 years old. My dad says you saved his life. He says you're a hero. I drew you a picture. Dad says I can send it if you give us your address. Thank you for bringing my daddy home." Emma attached was a photo of a child's drawing. 2 stick figures, one in military uniform with a rifle, one in a hospital bed. Between them, a heart. Mara stared at it for a long time, feeling something break and heal simultaneously in her chest. She replied with her address. 3 days later, the drawing arrived in the mail, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. Mara hung it on her office wall next to her marksmanship awards and unit citations. Some people asked about it. She never explained. It wasn't for them. It was a reminder of why she did this, of what was at stake, of the lives connected to every decision, every shot, every moment of refusing to give up. Real heroes don't announce themselves. They step forward when everyone else steps back. They watch when others look away. They refuse to accept defeat when acceptance would be easier. And when the moment comes, when everything hangs in the balance, they make the choice that others won't. Not for glory, not for recognition, because someone has to, because they can't live with themselves if they don't. Mara Kincaid had learned that lesson in a valley in Afghanistan. Now she was teaching it to others, one student at a time, ensuring that the next generation understood what real courage looked like. It looked like refusing to abandon someone everyone else had written off. It looked like standing your ground when the world told you to run. It looked like being so stubborn, so committed, so utterly unwilling to quit that you changed the outcome through sheer force of will. That was the legacy. That was the message. And it was worth every moment of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. Because in the end, when it mattered most, she'd been the one who stayed. And that made all the difference.